South Korea's intelligence agency says it has evidence showing North Korea was behind two hack attacks on the country's cryptocurrency exchanges earlier this year. The National Intelligence Service says North Korea is suspected of stealing the personal information of some 30,000 people registered with Bitsum in June and robbing virtual money from Coiniz in September. It says malicious code used by the North Korean group behind the 2014 Sony Pictures hack was discovered in both cases. The evidence has been provided to prosecutors for further investigation.
It's not really a dilemma. You have to use a little bit of logic, and international relations has some logic to it. Kim would know that any such act on his part would lead to the obliteration of his country. Not only would he die, but millions of his citizens would die, along with probably quite a few South Koreans and possibly some Japanese along with it. And let's not forget, we have 28,000 U.S. troops in South Korea. So why would he risk his own security and the security of his country to initiate a war with the United States? So it makes no sense. He's not crazy. Allies, Russia and China.
Well, the point I'm making.
Why would he threaten the United States?
Well, he's not an ally he's not really an ally of Russia from the standpoint Russia doesn't want him to have nuclear capability. In fact, President Putin talked about that today.
You can have differences. You can have differences of political policy positions between allies. We have plenty of them with Germany, with England. That's not unusual. So every state pursues its own state interests, and clearly Russia has a different set of state interests. But the real reason, in answer to your question, is that they're not threatening North Korea. The United States has been. Let's not forget that the war actually never ended. We have an armistice, which is an interruption in hostilities, but not a peace treaty that ended the war. What Korea really needs is a treaty to end the war.
Personally, I think direct talks is a must. We've evolved to that point right now. And that was not the position of the United States in previous administrations. But to sit there and just pay no attention to what he is saying about hitting the United States, that's a pretty big gamble, I think.
Well, you don't have to ignore what he says, but let's be honest. We have two presidents whose by personality tend to overstate their cases. Let's be charitable.
Okay.
Their style of leadership is questionable, but that doesn't mean that he's ready to commit suicide. The United States needs to come to terms, and that means negotiating a treaty.
Okay. Mr. Eisinger, that's all we have time for. I appreciate your time tonight. And
really what's happened here, on October the 13th, the president the president determined that he was not going to certify Iran being in compliance with the nuclear deal, something he has to do every 90 days, something he has done every 90 days since his administration took over. That kicked it to the Congress, and they had 60 days to conduct a review and decide whether to impose sanctions or not. Those 60 days were up yesterday. The Congress decided to do nothing. So I think what Nikki Haley's doing, they're heading towards another date, January the 13th, where they have to certify whether Iran is in compliance or not. I think they now likely have some evidence that they probably are not in compliance, and I think we're heading towards the President of the United States to pull the United States out of this deal. I think that is the direction we're heading. We have to hear what Nikki Haley's evidence are. But what we do know is that Iran is conducting ballistic missile tests in violation of UN resolution. Number two, they're transferring arms, drones, and missiles to the Houthis, and the Houthis are firing those missiles at Saudi Arabia. Those things are in violation of UN resolution. Whether there's specifics about the nuclear deal, we have to find out from her.
Well, what are the implications, though, of the president pulling the United States out of the Iran deal? I mean, let's not forget all that cash that was sent to Iran already. We gave them all that money, basically in brown paper bags, huge swaths of euros and Swiss francs. So they have all that money already, and then pulling out now, implications?
Well, yes. I mean, it's a great question, Maria. First of all, it doesn't mean that the other nations, the other 5 nations who also signed the nuclear deal, would pull out of it.
Right.
Likely, they probably would not unless our evidence is so overwhelming that it compels them to do that. They're all doing business with Iran, and they're kind of cozying up to them, to be frank about it. These are European nations, and I doubt whether they want to pull out of it. Secondly, I think what the administration is trying to cope with is just the harsh reality that Iran is aggressive and trampling over U.S. interests and those of our allies in the region. I don't think they would make a move to pull out without discussing this with Israel and without discussing it with Saudi Arabia. And I would believe that if they pull out, both of those countries would be in agreement.
All right, well, we'll watch that. It's important. I want to get to a couple more things with you, gentlemen, before you go, because we've got to talk about North Korea and also your take on the budget. So, curbing North Korea's nuclear missile program. The latest provocation from North Korea, Kim Jong-un, says his country, quote, will victoriously advance and leap as the strongest nuclear power and military power in the world, according to the state news agency KCNA. Your reaction to this provocation?
Well, more bellicose language from him, to be sure. But here's the backdrop to that, is the fact that the Russians have told us that North Korea is willing to have some serious negotiations. Whether that's true or not remains to be seen. Secretary of State Tillerson this week talked about negotiations. Now, listen, the North Koreans have always used negotiations as a ploy to advance their program covertly while we're conducting negotiations. Our administration here is very much aware of that. But I do think there may be a slight opening here, the beginning of a diplomatic effort to succeed. We'll see. In the next couple of weeks, I think we'll know the answer to that. The bellicose language will likely continue regardless.
You know, it's funny. You have to scratch your head wondering what this guy wants. I mean, he just wants to be recognized as a nuclear power, I guess.
No, what he wants, he has a rational strategy. I mean, what he wants is to guarantee the security of his regime, the Kim dynasty to go on. That's clearly what he wants. That's why he wants to point weapons at the American people, much like Russia and China does. If there's a way that we can convince him, truly convince him that we never would attack North Korea, then I think this thing starts to move in the right direction.
All right. We've talked about the budget a lot, General. You obviously have educated and informed us on this program in terms of the need to build up the military, the fact that 50% of our planes in the Navy are not flyable. What's your take this morning? Tuesday, President Trump signed that $700 billion military budget into law. It includes increasing funding for missile defense programs against North Korea. The budget will not become a reality until lawmakers, of course, roll back a law capping the 2018 defense spending at $549 billion. And that's one thing that was very important to you, removing those caps. Are you surprised by all of this? What's your take in terms of what we learned yesterday on the budget regarding military spending?
Well, first of all, this is a huge down payment on rebuilding the military, something that President Trump promised in the campaign, something now he's executing. That's good. But the problem is we have budget caps. And if we don't remove the budget caps, then the base budget goes back to what you just said. It's going to be about $100 billion less in the base budget, or $549. That's Obama's base budget. What I think will happen, in talking to the congressmen themselves, is I think we will get an agreement in suspending the budget caps probably for 2 more years. That will take some Democrats to agree, not just Republicans, because you need 60 votes in the Senate to be able to do something like that. That will also mean that they're going to have to give the Democrats some increases in programs that they want to be able to make this compromise work.
So, I mean,
I think so far this meeting is going pretty well. You know, we need to go back to, for instance, a couple of months ago, for instance, in July. Think about China and then South Korea relationship because of the THAAD issue. Chinese government's retaliation or sanction, whatever we call it, and then tourism was all stopped. And also, we were not quite sure whether there will be a kind of summit meeting at the end of this year. But after the 19th Party Congress in China, the Chinese government, in a sense, in a positive way, switched this diplomatic, strategies in dealing with South Korea, and then some meeting happened. So important thing is that both leaders got together and then talked about and they tried to improve mutual understanding and tried to respect each other. And in that sense, I think it's a very important new chapter. I'm not sure whether you can call it as a kind of turning point or milestone, but I think it's a very positive sign in terms of improving both countries' relations.
Song, this year also marks the 25th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between South Korea and China, as we heard there at the introduction. How does China view this relationship, and is this indeed a new beginning, do you think?
Yes, I think so. And we know our diplomatic link with South Korea was established in 1992, and we faced a lot of pressure from the DPRK side. And in the last 25 years, I think China and South Korea have achieved a lot of cooperations in bilateral relationship. And China is #1 trade partner of South Korea, and South Korea is #3 trade partner. And we have a lot of communications and cooperations. We remember in 2015, then President Park was visiting Beijing to participate in the this parade organized by Chinese government, which was very significant. But in the last 1 year, we know because of the SAD issue, the relationship was experiencing significant turbulence. But I think it's correct to say that this visit of President Moon Jae-in will be a turning point. And I think two sides are determined to capture this opportunity to move ahead these bilateral cooperations.
Sun Yun, broadly speaking, it seems that there are two major concerns here for these two leaders: security issues, nuclear issues on the Korean